live from Huntertown, Indiana. It's Soarin Hawk on the air. So today we're going to do something a little bit different. So you won't get to see my smiley face. Well, you can't see it anyways because I'm wearing this nice blue mask here. But today, it's a nice, warm, 44 degrees, sunny day out here. The snow's melting, it's all going away, and the birds are getting active. And so today we're going to talk about migration. And this is going to be a little bit long-winded. And when have I ever been short-winded? So, so today we're going to talk about migration. Yesterday there were flocks of sandhill cranes flying over. There's geese are all getting excited. Our raptors out here are already starting to build nests. A couple of the red tails are getting into nesting mode. So it's going to be like a really great thing. So. But, migration, is one of those things that, scientists are still studying. They don't quite understand it, but it's so fascinating. So I thought I'd share some of this with you. So today we're going to talk about migration. Well, one of the things I found was this is a big job, okay? So a little bit more than I expected. So, but don't panic, all right? We're going to make it here. So we're going to go through here and see what I can teach you about it. If you got questions, you can throw them in.
Yep,
we'll see.
I'm going to monitor questions on my
Okay,
computer.
you're monitoring questions?
Yes.
Okay. So
I will let you know when we get
So let me know if you got some good questions, and but kind of hold some of them. Maybe I answer some of the questions later on through this whole process. So like I said, this one's a little long-winded, and we'll see how it goes. So why do animals migrate? Okay, there's a couple reasons, or some reasons that they migrate to go find food. When the food dries up or when they've eaten everything, you move on, So it's kind of like, you move from the refrigerator to the freezer and to some other things. So the animals do the same thing. Sometimes they move on to avoid bad weather. If it's going to snow or something like that, there's no sense staying around because if it snows, it covers up the ground. They can't find food, and so you move on. Sometimes birds or animals migrate to safe areas so they can reproduce, safely, have their kids, raise their kids, where there's a place where it's safe for them, from predators, but also where there's food available. And sometimes it's a combination of all these things. So we're going to go over quickly over a lot of the stuff about migration. So why do animals migrate? Well, migration, they figured, started somewhere around 100,000 years ago. Up to that time, birds, very similar to our warblers that we have today that we think of as being neotropical, actually lived right up there against the Arctic Ocean. Because all there was at the polar cap was a little bit of ice up there. But then again, the ice age came on, the glaciers came down and shoved everybody south. Some of them didn't go south fast enough, and that's why every so often we find a woolly mammoth, all frozen up, So he didn't get the message, And we've had these ice ages on and off over the centuries. Centuries? How about millennia? And so the ice came down, then it receded, then it came down and it receded. And this caused a lot of the animals to adapt to this and to actually move with the seasons. So as the ice came down, they moved south into more tropical areas along the equator. And then they moved north when the ice receded. So there was a lot of stuff that went on to cause animals to start moving. So there's a lot of different migration patterns, and I'm going to discuss some of them. And so we have what we call north-south short migrations, okay? And typical of that is our friends, the short-eared owls. Here's Sherman there, and Sherman is a short-eared owl. And right now, short-eared owls are here in this area, but basically they are up there in the north regions to the north of us. So they're up above the Great Lakes and up into Canada, Alaska, and all the way over into Newfoundland and not quite to Greenland, okay? And they're circumpolar, all right? So they're found in the Arctic regions, if you will, above the temperate zones, and that's where they go. And then when winter comes on and it gets too cold or it gets to a point where there's the food is covered and they can't get the food, then they move south. And so typically they move south into our area and they spend the winters here. And and they may range further south. But so these are little short migrations, several hundred miles, maybe 500-600 miles. And so they're short migrations. We have other birds that do that, like our house wrens. They move from here and they go down to Texas or Arizona, or I shouldn't say Arizona, Alabama, Georgia, that area, and then they're going to come back north again. So there's north-south long migrations, okay, long longitudinal migrations, and these are the ones that we always talk about, that these birds take really great flights. And so here are the typical flight that we talk about, the flyways a lot. So we have these big, long migrations that go all the way from the Arctic zones all the way down to the ends of South America, Africa, those places. And so these are the major flyways found around the world, and they're long. I mean, just look at them, thousands of miles.
Wow.
And of course we have the major flyways here in the United States or North America. And this is just some typical ones. And so, we have the typical one that goes through the middle of the, central area here, basically bounded between the Mississippi River and the Appalachian mountain chain. But some of the flyways are really interesting, and some of the paths they're taking. I was really fascinated to find out that, I knew the godwits, some of the shorebirds, they take some really long trails. And and one of the things that was interesting is, while this route that the godwits take all the way down here is actually what they call a Great Circle route. And as you know, if you're a pilot or a boatsman or something like that, to get from one place on the globe to another place, you don't go in a straight line because that's the long way. You take the Great Circle route and you fly that direction. So animals actually found the Great Circle route before we did. But the big surprise, right?
Yeah.
But there are things like the black-polled warbler there. He takes this route where he flies off. He gets down there to Massachusetts, Cape Cod,
Wow.
flies out over the ocean, and may spend up to 4 days flying before he reaches the Bahamas and those places. So there's routes like that. Then there's the coastal route, so they're kind of bound in there between the Appalachians and the East Coast. And you got the Pacific route, which is basically the Rocky Mountains and the shore there. So there's a lot of different routes, and those are the ones that we mostly know about. And most of the birds that we get is mainly the central flyway that comes up through us. And some of the birds are getting ready. Down there in Mexico and northern Venezuela right now, the broad-winged hawks, like
Like
Hawkeye, like Hawkeye,
Yeah.
are getting all ready to come back. And so they're massing up in these huge flocks. So they're massing up down there, getting up there in those thermals, and it's lifting them up. And pretty soon they're going to be starting to stretch out across the Caribbean, hitting the Dominican Republic, Haiti, Cuba, all those places. And what will happen is that as they come up, the guys that are coming up through the Cuba and that will go up the East Coast, east of the Rocky Mountains. The guys that come to us actually come out of Mexico, the Yucatan Peninsula. They'll jump off there and head out across into Texas, and then they'll funnel up and come up our direction. So those guys are already massing, and so they've already started their journey. So, but there's some other migration patterns that occur. There's what we call the East-West short program and pattern, and that's mainly some birds like some of the osprey and the bald eagles and some of those. What they do as the weather changes and their food source, the lakes and rivers and things, start freezing up, then they head out to the coast. Okay, so they'll go out to the Atlantic Ocean and so they can find food out there, or they'll fly in toward the major rivers like the Mississippi, and you get huge concentrations of birds. But they just make east-west travel instead of going to going north and south for a long time. So here's our friend Jefferson, looking grand as
Yeah.
usual. Oh,
Yeah.
he always looks good, you know.
He does.
Yeah, so, and Jefferson is typical of the short trail. What he did was he was hatched up there in Flint, Michigan, and he flew south a little bit, got to Detroit, decided he didn't like what was there, and so he headed southwesterly. He was heading to where a lot of the bald eagles hang out, and unfortunately, he encountered some power lines over there in Wabash, and he went down. And so he's been with us. But several of the birds that we have gotten, bald eagles that we've received, we've actually taken back to down to Salamone and released them there with the other bald eagles. And we know that we have one there that keeps coming back. That was Moochie. And we know it's Moochie because Moochie has a band. And so we know that Moochie has been coming back for at least the last 7 years. So we know that we've been successful. And but that's the short migration. So they just go to where they can find food easily. And so east-west migration. And then we have altitudinal migration, okay? Well, we're living in the flatlands, so there's hardly anything that changes altitude, you know. But if you go out west, up into the Rocky Mountains or up into the Appalachians, you'll actually find that there are birds that move up and down. And, you might think of them as being resident birds. Typical of this are grouse. They will go down into the feeding areas where there's berries and stuff like that. And actually, it's really weird because actually it's a reverse migration because they actually go back uphill to get where they feed on pine cones and needles off trees and things like that. But there are a lot of other places where you have things like some of the jays, like Canada jays and others, that will actually descend from the higher altitudes down the mountains. So, and as I understand, for every 1,000 feet they descend, that's equivalent to 1,000 miles of flatland migration. So it's kind of an interesting thing. So there are some birds that do that kind of thing. So it's altitudinal, moving up and down. And I don't know, I got some questions.
There's somebody said here, I'll read it to you. She said, what's going on? Found 20 Canadian geese and more still in the water. 4 mallards and 8 coots, all dead in Wolf Lake at the northern end of Forsyth Park by what used to be called Mazzeo Channel, which is right behind Cargill. This is before Cargill workers and city employees came over to pick them up. Something is poisoning all these different species of waterfowl. Contacted the different agencies, but I'm sure nothing will be done. Somebody, I'm not saying no names, is polluting the lake. She said, this just happened in northern Indiana. Can you please help?
Well, I don't know. We can report it to DNR and ask them. And there's several reasons. It could be poison, or the other thing is that occasionally what happens is what they may be feeding on has gone toxic, because it's been covered over by ice, and so there may be a reason for that. So we'll talk to the people down at DNR. So I'm going to continue with this. So sometimes we have birds actually leapfrog, same species, but some of the races and subspecies actually will come, when they migrate, they'll pass over an area where there's resident birds of the same type. And a good choice of that is like the kestrels. Kestrels go all the way up into Alaska and Canada, but that's only certain races. Now, when winter comes and they migrate, a lot of times birds that live in the area stay put. They don't migrate. They just stay put because they know the territory. They have their nest holes. They have their food sources. And so, like the birds that our kestrels here are resident birds. They're not going to move. But there's other birds coming down from Canada that actually leapfrog over top of our races and go further south. So a lot of times you'll see some kestrels out here that look nice and slim and trim. You say, okay, that's a kestrel. But you'll see some other ones coming down that look a little bulkier, a little darker color maybe, and they look just slightly different. And it's because the bigger, larger birds that live up in the Canadian areas where have to be a little hardier. Same way with like the robins. I know a lot of people are complaining about the Canadian robins because the Canadian robins are being very aggressive toward our local birds. And so, and if you look at the race of robins that have come down from the north, they look darker, they look larger, and so you have those birds, and so they've leapfrogged over the others too, and they're spending their winter here with us. And finally, there are things called eruptions, and this is when you have a situation where the typical area that the birds might spend their winter in is snowed over, or there's not enough food, or there's just too many people, or I'm sorry, too many birds feeding, too many predators, and so they move further south. So it's like our guys like snowy owls. They're one of the what we call an eruptive species, and typically snowy owls, the range, usually ends up there in Michigan and maybe just along the Indiana-Michigan line. But occasionally we'll have a few guys that just come on down further south, and so we get eruptions sometimes extending all the way down into Kentucky and Kansas, Missouri, that kind of area, and because the either food base is missing, or they just need more room, or maybe we had too much snow or something, and it lasted longer than we anticipated. Most of the time our snow around here is only last a week or so. I think this is the longest period that we've had snow covering up the ground. So sometimes the birds move down. So we have these eruptions that occur. This isn't just snowy owls. In some areas further to the west, you get like great gray owls will come down, hawk owls will come down, things like that. So they'll erupt. But they have a typical movement where they move south. But again, that's a short migrator. And sometimes they extend and actually erupt into an area. Wow, we've chewed up a lot of time already. So how do birds find their way home? Okay. Well, there's long distance, okay? And as you can see, long distance birds, they depend upon the Earth's magnetic field and the sun, their position, For middle distance birds, basically they depend upon things like the landscape, seeing what the landmarks are around, sometimes smells, particularly with ocean-going birds. They have very sensitive sense of smell. They have very large olfactory bulbs. And then and for near distance, in other words, the local birds, they depend on looking around and seeing where the heck they are. So anyway, so how do birds navigate? Well, first off, apparently baby birds, back. How do we go back? Now, if I put my glasses on, I can see what I'm doing here. Okay. Let's see. Last viewed. Okay. So basically, baby birds have some innate thing where they actually, in general, know where they're heading. And they've done a lot of experiments with the baby birds, and they find out that they can displace the baby bird, 300 or 400 miles, and it will, in general, follow the flow, so to speak, and end up somewhat nearby where it's supposed to end up. Not exactly with the rest of the family, but they get there. There's also,
That's sorry. Someone texted me.
Okay, there we go. So another way to navigate is that you follow natural features. Okay, you look for landmarks, that kind of thing. Navigation, you use the sun. Whoops, again. Dang. Okay, I got triggered. Okay, so you can follow the sun. Sometimes you use the magnetic lines around the Earth. And you can either use it as a compass to guide you, or sometimes, depending, the birds actually use it as a map. The field, the lines of magnetic force, the flux lines, they actually can detect those. Some birds actually fly at night, and they follow the stars, and so they have celestial navigation. And then there's a strange one, infrasonics, and in that case, they use it mainly as a triggering thing. So like when they hear thunderstorms coming, or the roar of the ocean, things like that. some of those very low frequency sounds, they can use that for guidance. So when we follow the natural features, I call that IFR, I follow roads. So the birds can go, they fly over, they can see the coastline, rivers, and unfortunately it doesn't show up on here, but they can also follow highways. In fact, more and more birds that typically use natural features to navigate by are now using highways. So it's not unusual when you see sandhill cranes going or geese. You'll actually see them flying down I-69, heading south or heading north. Same way with the broadwing hawks, they form up over top of I-69 and they follow that down. There's also using the sun. They use the position of the sun to tell where they are. But one of the unique features is they use the polarized light that comes off from our sky. When sunlight hits our atmosphere, it basically scatters, but it also, a portion of it actually goes into what we call polarized light. In other words, it forms, instead of a straight beam coming through, you get a glow, if you will, that is at 90 degrees to that. And you people that drive, you have your polarized sunglasses, and it reduces the glare. And and it's kind of an interesting thing. So this whole solar thing, we all know how the Earth goes around the sun. It has an inclination here that points at the North Star or Polaris. So it's always at 23.5 degrees. So as what happens is as the Earth moves around the sun, but the axis stays the same. It looks like the days get longer and longer and longer. So the birds can detect that the days are getting longer and longer, and they know, just like you and I, that the sun rises on the east and sets on the west. So they have that all worked out, and so they can follow the sun that way. But they can also use that polarized light, because when the sun comes up in the morning, the polarized light is actually going north-south. At noon, it's just circular, okay? So it's just scattered all over. And then when it sets in the west, it goes parallel to the north-south. And the birds use this to actually reset their compass. Just like, I don't know if you're aware of it, but pilots, particularly when they fly up toward the Arctic areas, they have to continually reset the compass in their planes, because magnetic north and true north actually differ, okay? And as you get further and further up there, the more it deviates. And this is just a little chart there just for laughs. Anyways, so this just shows the year going across this way, and it shows the length of the day, and so you get the day length here, and as you advance through the year, the length of the day gets longer and longer, and here are the particular bearings. We're here around 40, between 30 and 45 degrees. Okay, so our days go up to about almost 16 hours, and then in the wintertime they go down here to less than 8 hours of daylight. So, and the birds know this; it's built in, so they know. So the polarized light, I talked about that a little bit. Rays of ordinary light vibrate different directions. Polarized light rays vibrate in only one direction. And the birds are able to detect that, okay? And so they use the dawn and dusk light to recalibrate their compass to make sure that they're heading toward north. And one of the important things about the polarized light is there is polarized light during the day, even if it's cloudy, okay? So they can still sense where the sun is, and so they can still keep themselves on their true course. And this is just a description of how this is the sun at noon, and the light's all scattered, but at sunset or sunrise, the lines are parallel to north and south. And if you notice that south is up top, that's because I stole this picture from New Zealand. So, and they're at the bottom end of the world. Well, then there's magnetic, okay? Hasn't shown up yet.
There's a slight
There's
delay.
a delay, okay.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Yeah.
so the birds rely on the magnetic lines of force around the Earth, and not exactly that way, but close. And so, again, I stole this picture from New Zealand. So, so, anyways, you can see that these are the lines of force. And as you get closer and closer to the magnetic pole, the lines get more and more closer and closer together, and they can become more and more intense. And so the birds actually can detect these lines. So when they're going across the equator, the lines are pretty flat. But when they get up close to the pole, there's more and more lines of flux, and it becomes more and more intense, and they can detect that. So they use both techniques of coming using the sun to help guide them, and also the magnetic lines. Not all birds have this ability, but most of them do. And so the magnetic navigation equipment depends on two things. There's a material called magnetite, which is a ferrous ore, and it acts as a mechanical sensor. Okay, so in other words, it detects the magnetic lines. Okay, and it's good for detecting minute changes in the magnetic lines as they're getting closer and closer as they're heading north or heading south. And then there's what we call cryptochromes. Ooh. And so we'll discuss those a little bit. And so magnetite exists in a number of birds. Homing pigeons are good for it. A lot of other birds have this material. And I looked it up, and they say that the people don't have this. But, there's some people, it doesn't matter where you put them. They know exactly where they're going. So I'm sure there's magnetite in there somewhere. Or maybe it's just some old residual iron in their heads. But anyways, so they have magnetite, and basically there's two forms of it. One form goes around the beak like this, and so it, and then there's another form that's actually much more solid. And so these things here this magnetite is actually in the nerve endings, and so so it can actually detect the lines and actually help guide the bird. I guess I'm going to have to hurry up or not talk so much. But the more interesting one is this thing called cryptochromes. And yeah, this is something that they conjectured about for years and years, but couldn't find it. So this is a typical eye of a bird, and they've taken a section here. And if you take a section of the retina, you find rods and cones in there. Cones are looking for color, rods are looking for light intensity. And buried inside the rod cells are a little disc of something called cryptochromes. Now, cryptochromes are sensitive to blue light. In fact, these cryptochromes can actually be found in plants. They detect blue light, and that's what sometimes triggers when they seed or don't seed, or when they start pollinating. Also, some of the flowers, actually, like sunflowers, they actually rotate, back and forth. So this cryptochrome is found in plant life, but it's also found in animal life. And they say they have not detected this in people yet. But anyways, the cryptochromes can actually detect the magnetic lines. Okay, they're sensitive to the magnetic lines. And so what they conjecture is that the polarized light thing, okay, you got that coming in, and so they sense that, and then you have the cryptochromes finding the magnetic lines, and they actually coincide somehow in the eye. And it's like having a heads-up display in your plane. So you're flying along, and it shows you the compass heading and the bearing, and away you go. So really just fantastic stuff that's going on there, And so that's a little cryptochrome thing, okay. But celestial navigation, that's another one that's just fantastic, So this is a typical sky chart, and this would be a springtime sky chart. Here's Ursa Minor, and there's Polaris up there, okay, the North Star, Draco, the dragon here, okay. And so what the birds do is they actually know what these patterns look like. I don't know if they actually have names for these constellations or not, but they know when there's certain constellations in certain positions, then they know there's the North Star, and that's what they're heading for. So it's just a fantastic thing. And they've done experiments where they've done all kinds of tricky things with the birds. They've put them in little cages so they can't see outside. They change the polarity of the light for one thing, and see what the birds do, see if they react to it. And same thing, they've taken the birds, they take them to planetariums, and they put them in cages in a planetarium. Then they rotate the sky, and then the birds react to it. So there's all kinds of things. They don't know exactly how it all works, but this is just fantastic. So the celestial. So when do you migrate? Well, the birds start getting physiological changes. Okay, so the sun starts rising earlier in the morning, and pretty soon it's starting to trigger things like the hormones, the breeding hormones, and stuff like that. So the ovaries start enlarging, and other things happen. I won't get into the other things. Okay, so there's physiological changes that occur in the birds, and it's kind of like, hey, it's time to go north. And quite the opposite happens when they're going south, because everything shrinks up, and they say, oh well, I'm not chasing birds anymore, so it's time to go south. Weather patterns change. And so it's starting to get cold, it's getting rainy, it's getting miserable. They know that when certain weather patterns occur, their food won't be available. The food dries up, or it floods out and you can't get to it. So. And then the migration schedule. There's daytime migrants. They usually wait for thermal. So they wait till about 9, 10 o'clock in the morning. And they get up, wait for the wind to come up, get those thermals, and they lift them up. So things like cranes and hawks and things like that, big winged birds, will do something like that. And then somewhere around 4 o'clock, they'll stop for dinner and rest for the night. And then the next day, they'll get up and do it again. So again, Hawkeye and his friends will actually do this. They're daytime migrants. There's nocturnal migrants. They feed and rest all during the day. So they feed, rest during the day, and then when evening comes, they reorient their compass using those polarized lines, and then they take off into the darkness, and then they head toward in the direction they're supposed to go. And typically, they communicate with each other through chirps. So a lot of times you go out there at night, and if you're in a quiet area, you can actually hear the birds flying over, chirping and chipping,
Now, what kind of birds would be migrating at night?
Thrushes, warblers, vireos, a lot of the small, what you might call dicky birds. So those guys are flying at night, And then there's the nonstop migrants. We talked about the black-polled warbler, stuff like that. What they do is they double up on their fat load, so they have enough food that they can actually fly for days without having to refuel. So who is moving? Who's moving? What? Who's moving? What happened? I think I lost something. Well, okay. Well, right now the waterfowl and cranes are moving. So there have been masses of cranes. They're heading north right now. Waterfowl is starting to move as the lakes and things open. The raptors will be here moving shortly, so we're going to start seeing some of the migration of some of the red tails and rough-legged hawks and stuff like that. They're going to be starting to move up the Appalachian Mountains and across, and also some of the prairie areas. So some of the raptors are going to be starting to move up, and we're going to see the broadwings come in. They should be hitting the Gulf Shore here just shortly. Come on. Are you going to go? Okay. You're not going to go. Not going to go. Okay. Okay, so early spring, which is going to occur probably here beginning of about mid-March or whatever. So the northern races of the passerines are going to start coming up. Purple martins will be getting up here. They've already started. They're on their way up from Brazil. But I've already seen hummingbirds are already down in Atlanta. Okay, so they're not too far away. So hummingbirds will be coming up here, but we can expect the purple martins about the 15th of March, thereabouts. So if you have martin houses, get out there, clean them out, get them all spiffied up and everything. Don't wait till they show up, all right? Yeah. So get them out there. And then later on, there's going to be other birds, the thrushes and warblers and stuff like that will be starting to move up. Also, some of the house wrens will be coming back here shortly. So, and then... So get your houses cleaned out, all right? Get them all spiffied up, ready for the birds to come. Bluebirds are already trying to move into boxes right now, so they've already started. And then so you're going to have more passerines coming through. And let's see what's going on here. And then so the long distance passerines, okay, so you had the ones that roost here or stay here for the winter in the United States. Now you're going to have the ones that went down to South America, and they're going to, so the long distance passerines are going to come in, and then finally in late spring you get the about the second week of May, you're going to get those woodland warblers and stuff like that are going to be coming charging through. The cuckoos come through, all kinds of stuff come through, just in time for the raptors to feed their young. So it's kind of like, well, it's good and it's bad. Okay, so anyways, one of the things I gotta say is, wow, birds are great. Okay, so just looking at it, it's just so many fascinating things. So I promise next week I won't be this vociferous, but I just had to. Once I dug into it, I said I just have to talk about it. So So anyways, don't forget you can come out and visit us at the Soarin Hawk Adventure, Raptor Adventure. Give us a call, and we can make arrangements for you to come out and visit, see the birds, see us, see what we do. And don't forget, if you belong to the Kroger Community Rewards Program, sign up for us. I think we got about $490 last check, and that was just great. And but we only have 150 families, so we could use more families. We know, and I know that there are programs at other supermarkets that are in the Kroger chain. So sign up for those. Or Amazon Smile, keep the economy going. When you buy out there, make sure that you're on Amazon Smile and that you want your donation to go to us. So until next week, I'm going to say goodbye.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Thanks, Bob.
Hey, is that me? Oh, wow. Hi.
Hi. Oh, yeah. Hi, everybody.
Hi, everybody. So anyway,
there's the behind the scenes.
Yeah. So it's
okay. Well, thanks, everybody, and we'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.